webinar now. So my name is Marina Finken, and I'm the Making Finance Work for Africa Partnership Coordinator. And I'm delighted to welcome you today to this webinar on behalf of our partners, Making Finance Work for Africa, the Africa Fintech Network, and the AfricaNenda. So I'm really happy to see you, many participants today to this webinar of a paramount importance. Fintech sustainability in Africa, the impact of corporate governance and regulations. Why this webinar and this issue is important? As we know, fintechs have revolutionized the way financial services are delivered and accessed around the world. And in Africa, it has unleashed a wave of innovations that holds immense potential for economic growth, financial inclusion, and improved livelihoods. And the trends that we can observe currently are quite positive, are quite promising. Indeed, the Africa fintech is booming in Africa, with estimated revenue of 4 to 6 billion in 2020, and an average penetration level of 3 and 5%, excluding South Africa. And those are the figures according to a recent analysis from McKinsey. It is really important to recognize and to salute the progress made so far, this exponential growth. But we also need to be aware of the fact that the Africa fintech industry, despite what we are observing, is still at a very early stage. Our Africa fintech, which are really crucial for financial inclusion and to address all the social and economic challenges in Africa, haven't yet achieved sustainability. And according to the same report of McKinsey I just mentioned, in order to achieve sustainability, there are 4 main challenges the Africa fintechs are facing. And among these 4 challenges, 2 are related to corporate governance foundations and the current regulatory environment. And indeed, the innovation made by the fintech is quite impressive, but with great innovation comes the need for robust governance and regulation to ensure the stability, the security, and ethical conduct of fintech company. This is why this webinar today is really important. It's really important to discuss this issue. So together, we will delve into the corporate governance challenges and also opportunities that Africa fintech are facing. We will discuss the evolving regulatory framework across African nations, and we will seek to identify strategies to foster a responsible and inclusive fintech industry. With this webinar, the different partners gathered today aim to provide a set of policy recommendations for policymakers and industrial players to develop coherent frameworks and policy approaches towards fintech firms. So the panels and the panelists and speakers we will hear today shortly, and we will introduce later, will provide valuable insight and diverse perspective on these topics, shedding the light on the way forward for fintech governance and regulations in Africa. As usual in our webinars, we will have the opportunity to react to information provided to this insight during the Q&A session. Your questions and contributions are very valued and also crucial to enrich the dialogue. So before we begin our discussion, I want to thank again the partners supporting this webinar today, AfricaNenda, the Africa Fintech Network, and Making Finance Work for Africa, and also our speaker, which we will introduce later on. Your commitment to advancing the financial sector is commendable, and we thank you for your support. So we will start briefly. Let me quickly remind some housekeeping rules. The duration of the webinar, so we will be together for an hour and a half, including the question and answer session I just mentioned. So you will notice that all your microphones are disabled for the duration of the webinar. We will ask you please to remain mute, and we will give you the opportunity to speak during the Q&A session. You have a translation. This webinar is available in English and in French. You just have to click on to use the interpretation button on the Zoom platform. As usual, the slide and the recording for this webinar will be shared with you to all the registered participants within 72 hours. And they will also be available on our website, makingfinanceworkforafrica.org. You can send a message to the organizer if you encounter any technical problems. And please, at the end of the webinar, a questionnaire, satisfaction questionnaire will automatically appear on your browser. So please take the time. It's really fast to provide your feedback on this webinar. So without further ado, we will start. I will leave the floor now to Mr. Patrick Sedukonte, CEO of the Africa Fintech Network. We will navigate you through this webinar and moderate the panel. Thank you very much again for your participation, and I wish you a very productive and insightful webinar. Patrick, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Magina, for those warm remarks. I also want to join on behalf of the African Fintech Network to say welcome to all participants and panelists on this wonderful webinar on fintech sustainability. I mean, I think Marina has laid a very firm foundation as to, you know, the positive, the good news when it comes to fintech, the contribution to economic growth, financial inclusion, revenues that are being made. Africa can now boast for about 7 to 10 unicorns, i.e. fintechs with market capitalization of at least $1 billion. So yeah, a lot is happening in terms of the good news when it comes to fintech, but a lot more is also underneath this success. There are a lot of constraints, there are a lot of challenges. And today, we want to start looking at some of these challenges by focusing on the governance issues, as well as the regulations governing the operations on fintech. So do justice to this topic. We have 3 panelists on this session today. I will now pass it over, starting with Mustafa for self-introduction. Mustafa?
Yeah, I'm right here, je suis là. Donc, mon nom, c'est Mustafa Aou. Je suis directeur de la réglementation et de la surveillance à la Banque centrale de Mauritanie. Donc, je suis aussi avocat inscrit, mais je suis plus à la Banque centrale. Je travaille que pour la Banque centrale. Donc, voilà, merci.
Thank you, Mustafa. Isabel?
Thank you, Patrick. Good afternoon to all of you. My name is Isabelle Nesegina. I'm a managing partner at ANIS, which is an advisory firm specializing in sustainability, financing, and governance, mainly working in advisory board and corporate board, official board of banks and financial institutions, and advising them to increase their sustainability, their governance, and finding the most optimal way to raise funding.
Thanks, Isabel. Mazio?
Hello, everyone. My name is Mazio Nyanyo, and I'm the Vice President for Finance, Administration, and Operations at the Ghana Fintech and Payments Association, where we're the foremost group of fintechs in Ghana, liaising with the central bank to support fintechs in the ecosystem. Thank you.
Mazio, you don't mind just putting on your camera for a couple of seconds so the audience will put name to the face for future engagement. Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, you all know me by now. I'm Patrick Conte. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for the African Fintech Network. We do 3 things at the African Fintech Network. 1, we foster collaboration of fintechs, amongst themselves at country level. Number 2, we also foster collaboration of fintech with key ecosystem stakeholders at their country level. So we're looking at government, regulators, development finance institutions. And number 3, we foster cross-border collaboration of fintechs through fintech associations, and we oversee 34 countries with that sort of collaboration. So we are happy to be part of this. We're happy to join AfricaNenda and making finance work for Africa. We are starting off with a brief presentation by both Mustafa and Mazio. Let's start off with ladies first. Mazio, lead us with a brief presentation on what the Ghana Fintech and Payment Association is doing. You're on mute, yeah.
Sorry, yes. Thanks. So the Ghana Fintech and Payments Association is a really robust community of fintech solutions, banks, and payment solutions in Ghana. And really, our role has been pivotal in lobbying between the fintech institutions and the central bank to find a common ground towards the progress of the fintech ecosystem. Essentially, we focus on policy advocacy, where we're engaging with the Bank of Ghana, the Securities Commission, and other stakeholders in the ecosystem to advocate for fintech-friendly regulation and policies. We're also heavily focused on capacity building, which is workshops and seminars that improves the governance, the capacity, and access to resources for our business, right? We're also facilitating information sharing and setting a standard across the ecosystem with the fintechs. Thank you very much.
Your presentation, Amazio?
Do you have the slides?
As possible.
Or should I do the slides? Okay. So fintech in Africa is really a dynamic fusion of finance and technology. We've been sparking a lot of innovation and digital transformation across the continent. But with great responsibility comes, especially in the realm of fintech, corporate governance is very important because with all this great innovation, we need to have responsibility for our actions. We're directly impacting companies and individuals with the financial solutions that are being put out there. Now, some of the challenges that fintechs face in terms of governance are actually in stages, because you have to recognize that there are fintechs in different stages. So we have the seed stage challenges, where you need to start planting the seeds of governance. Here you have founder dominance, complexity and compliance, being able to understand and data security, and then also dealing with investor scrutiny. These are much smaller fintechs that are growing in number, and you realize that you have a single founder or a few co-founders, and this leads to risk in terms of accountability and being able to actually raise investment later on. Now, at growth stage, you have a stage where, okay, you are finding your basis a bit, but we need to start nurturing governance. So you are starting to scale your operations maybe across regions or across borders. And then you have to deal with the regulatory compliance as you scale your solution. And as you scale your solution, you have more users, and you need to put in anti-money laundering, CFT, and that's all risk management that has to be considered. And you find that a lot of fintechs at growth stage find this difficult. And then it comes to talent acquisition. As you're expanding across your borders, you need to be able to acquire highly qualified talent in all the places that you are launching your solution into. And if there's a language barrier or other barriers, this is something that you have to overcome. Now, with maturity stage challenges, essentially, now you have to achieve board diversity so that you have a range of influences for your startup or fintech, right? Where you are able to access resources based on your board diversity and the impact that it has on your fintech. You also have to start looking at exit strategies. How are you going to be able to exit and sell this fintech to another investor or company, or what are the actual strategies that you want to have in place over the long term for the growth of the fintech? And then you have to look at sustainability and social representation. I believe that this is really important in scaling solutions and also in tackling corporate governance, because we need to be conscious of the sustainability of the businesses and the way in which we can grow them. Thanks. Now, the fintech sector has grown really dramatically in recent years, owing to factors such as the rising mobile phone penetration, leading to young populations that are eager to access digital financial services and able to utilize them. Now, African governments and regulators are then finding themselves in a unique dance because you have to craft policies and regulations that encourage innovation while keeping a close eye on consumer protection and financial stability. Some of the regulatory moves across the continent have been regulatory sandboxes in African countries that offer a controlled environment for fintech startups to experiment and innovate. You have tailored fintech regulations like Nigeria's regulatory framework for open banking, which promotes competition and innovation within the financial sector. African nations are modernizing payment systems, strengthening regulations to ensure the safety of electronic payments, as seen in the Ghana Payment Systems and Services Act. Now, digital identity verification, KYC requirements are evolving with acts like Uganda's National Identification and Registration Authority Act. Cybersecurity regulations, such as Kenya's National Payment System Cybersecurity Guidelines, are being introduced to protect online transactions and data. You have financial inclusion initiatives from Ghana, like the Ghana Card, which is expanding access to financial services for the underserved population. Because with this one card, you're able to access all the different services and it's one database for everybody. Now, efforts have been made to harmonize cross-border payment regulations within our African regions, such as the WEMU Mobile Banking and Payments Services Regulation, which aims to facilitate smoother cross-border financial activities. The growing influence of crypto and blockchain technologies is being addressed, as you can see in countries like South Africa that are implementing regulatory frameworks around that. My firm opinion is that achieving uniformity is going to take collaboration because achieving uniformity in the fintech regulation system in Africa is really like herding cats. You have different legal systems, economic conditions, and regulatory strengths, which creates sort of a patchwork of rules and approaches. But I believe that we're not giving up. You can really see that Africa's fintech stakeholders are collaborating. We're sharing best practices to foster innovation while protecting consumers and financial stability. And I believe that as we do more of this, we are going to grow the ecosystem. Thank you very much for allowing me to briefly share my insights on fintech governance and regulation. And let's continue to work together towards sustainable innovation in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Mazio, for laying that very good foundation. We'll now pass it on to Mustafa to give us perspective of what is happening in Mauritania.
Merci. Donc, je vais vous exposer en 6 points un peu la réglementation mauritanienne sur les fintechs. Donc, on peut aller au second slide, s'il vous plaît. Voilà. Donc, les 6 points, il s'agira de parler d'abord de l'aperçu rapidement du système du secteur financier mauritanien. Il est composé de quoi? De l'évolution du cadre réglementaire des fintechs, l'organisation de la gouvernance d'entreprise et la gestion des risques de contrôle interne et cyber et tout ce qui est lié. Et effectivement, une réglementation proportionnée en matière de lutte contre le blanchiment d'argent et le financement du terrorisme. Et enfin, la disposition des protections, une disposition sur la protection des consommateurs des services financiers numériques. Donc, le prochain slide, s'il vous plaît. Donc, en Mauritanie, prochain slide, s'il vous plaît. Donc, voilà. Donc, en Mauritanie, le secteur financier est composé de la Banque centrale, bien évidemment, 16 banques. Donc, 16 banques pour 309 agences bancaires, 32 institutions de microfinance pour 123 agences, Donc, on a la Poste, une caisse de dépôt et de développement qui finance les projets de développement pour les jeunes. Donc, 18 compagnies d'assurance, une caisse d'assurance maladie, 30 bureaux de change. Donc, le taux de bancarisation strict tourne autour de 13%. De façon élargie, quand on y inclut les institutions de microfinance, on a 30%. Donc, on a 7 établissements de paiement qui travaillaient avant. Ils faisaient plus de la remittance au niveau national et 5 fintechs ont été agréés en 2023. Donc, on peut aller au prochain slide. Ça, c'est un bref aperçu pour que vous ayez une petite idée de l'environnement. Donc, le cadre réglementaire, avant 2018 ou 2021, je dirais, avec la loi de 2021, reposait plus sur la loi bancaire. Mais la loi bancaire avait des insuffisances parce que elle ne traitait pas de l'émission et de la distribution de monnaie électronique, donc ce qui était un frein. Et il y avait une ordonnance de 2006, mais celle-ci avait été faite dans le cadre d'un monopole bancaire. C'était plus pour promouvoir l'utilisation des cartes et il ne prévoyait pas le mobile money et tout ce qui était innovation en matière de fintech. Donc, c'est dans ce cadre-là de vide juridique que la Banque centrale, avec les législateurs, ont promulgué une loi sur les services et moyens de paiement et qui encadrait et toute la réglementation relative aux cartes, au mobile money et tout ce qui était fintech. Et elle a été accompagnée de 4 textes réglementaires, un qui détaillait les services et moyens de paiement électroniques, les obligations auxquelles étaient soumis les fintechs. Donc, 2 autres instructions, une qui traite les établissements de paiement, de conditions d'agrément, de surveillance et de résolution. Une autre sur les établissements de monnaie électronique et une dernière, qui est la 4e, sur les agents pour l'instant. Donc, on peut aller au slide. Donc, cette réglementation a permis quand même une certaine effervescence et un engouement de nouveaux acteurs qui voulaient se lancer et concurrencer les banques commerciales. Donc, le dispositif de gestion des risques, de façon générale, en Mauritanie, dans la gouvernance, c'est plus des sociétés anonymes. Donc, les fintechs, que ce soit les 2 catégories, doivent être des sociétés anonymes avec un conseil d'administration, 2 directeurs généraux pour que le principe des 4 E puisse être respecté. Donc, le capital des fintechs, s'il s'agit des établissements de paiement, tourne autour de 500 000 $ avec un dépôt de garantie au niveau de la Banque centrale. Donc, le dépôt de garantie au niveau de la Banque centrale, étant donné que les fintechs ne font pas partie du fonds de garantie et de résolution qui existe à la Banque centrale, ces dépôts-là ne peuvent pas être touchés et constamment réévalués pour indemniser les clients lorsque la fintech tombe en faillite. Parce que vous savez que lorsqu'un établissement bancaire ou financier, quelle que soit la forme, tombe en faillite, ça biaise un peu la confiance du public et ça a toujours des retombées négatives. Donc, il est important de dédommager les utilisateurs. Donc, en matière de contrôle interne, ce qui est fait au niveau de la Banque centrale de Mauritanie, c'est d'utiliser une réglementation proportionnée. Bien vrai que les 3 niveaux de contrôle soient respectés, mais on peut permettre aux fintech de regrouper le contrôle permanent de second niveau, c'est-à-dire le responsable conformité et le responsable audit. Donc, les 2 fonctions peuvent être exercées par la même personne. Donc, ça a un impact dans la réduction des charges de la fintech qui commence. Donc, en matière de protection des données à caractère personnel, il y a une autorité et une loi. Donc, c'est l'autorité qui a une responsabilité transversale. Donc, elle peut faire des inspections au niveau de toute institution, qu'elle soit publique ou privée. Donc, les fintechs y sont assujettis. Donc, en ce qui concerne les systèmes d'information, donc celle-ci doit être résiliente, sécurisée et des audits informatiques doivent y être conduits. Donc, tous les 3 ans, et on doit informer la Banque centrale des tests qui sont faits. Il faut également qu'il y ait un PCA, un plan de continuité d'activité, si jamais il y a des incidents majeurs dans le pays, pour que les clients puissent avoir accès au service minimal. Donc, en matière de protection des fonds de la clientèle, donc c'est la méthode classique qui est préconisée par la Banque centrale, à savoir celle d'ouvrir des comptes de cantonnement. Les fonds qui sont dans les comptes de cantonnement ne peuvent pas être utilisés par les banques qui détiennent ces montants-là. Et ces montants, dès qu'ils sont collectés auprès de la clientèle des fintechs et directement déposés dans les comptes de cantonnement. Donc, ces montants ne peuvent pas être utilisés. Même lorsque la banque tombe en faillite, ces montants ne sont pas touchés. On peut aller au prochain slide, s'il vous plaît. Next slide, please. Donc, en matière de lutte contre le blanchiment d'argent, donc les deux catégories de comptes niveau 1 et niveau 2 peuvent être ouverts à distance sans besoin de présence physique. Mais par contre, le compte de 5 500 $, où les montants sont plafonnés à ce montant, les montants sont plafonnés à ce montant, ne peuvent être ouverts que lorsque la personne a une présence physique en agence, ce qui est vraiment souple pour une fintech. Et c'est même ce qui est recherché surtout pour les personnes qui sont éloignées. Le système d'agence est beaucoup plus allégé parce que on sait que l'ouverture d'une agence bancaire requiert beaucoup de moyens. C'est pourquoi les banques en général ont du mal à se déployer dans des zones très reculées. L'innovation ici, c'est qu'une personne physique ou une personne morale peut être agent d'une fintech et elle peut être agent de plusieurs fintechs. La seule condition, c'est qu'elle soit inscrite au niveau du registre de commerce. Donc, on peut avoir un système d'agent principal et de sous-agents. Donc, on peut aller au prochain slide, s'il vous plaît. Voilà. Donc, en matière de protection des consommateurs des services financiers, la Banque centrale y a mis l'accent parce que c'est très important à ce que les personnes soient bien traitées, la clientèle en l'occurrence, parce que une clientèle bien traitée, surtout au niveau du secteur bancaire, qui puisse introduire des réclamations, permet le développement de l'activité bancaire et l'ouverture encore plus de comptes et par ricochet, l'inclusion financière. C'est pourquoi les fintechs ont une obligation chaque début d'année, au mois de janvier, de fournir les relevés de comptes. Elles doivent également mettre en place un service pour traiter les réclamations, donc un service multicanal. Et le délai de réponse se fait sur une période de 15 jours au maximum. La FinTech a également l'obligation de donner au client les autres méthodes pour régler les différends, notamment la Banque centrale ou la justice, si jamais elle ne trouve pas satisfaction. Et tout paiement qui se fait de façon frauduleuse, la FinTech a l'obligation de restituer les montants au client, sauf si elle a des raisons de penser que c'est le client lui-même qui a initié la fraude. Et dans ce cas, elle informe la Banque centrale des raisons qui font qu'elle ne veut pas rembourser les clients. Donc voilà, grosso modo, ce qui est fait au niveau de la Banque centrale de Mauritanie et pour permettre un peu aux fintech de travailler et de développer l'inclusion financière et qu'elles ne soient pas soumises aux mêmes conditions que les banques qui sont voilà, qui ont de capital beaucoup plus lourd et demandent beaucoup plus d'investissement. Merci.
Thank you, Mustafa, for that brilliant presentation as well. Just a reminder, participants, please feel free. There is a Q&A, question and answer section. Pose your questions. In due course, the panelists, myself, will come to respond to those questions. Isabel, let me start off with you. Having heard the presentation of both Mazio and Mustafa, why is fintech corporate governance important in this rapidly evolving fintech landscape in Africa? Are standard corporate governance principles like separation of, between the board and management, risk, compliance considerations, should those be applicable to fintechs regardless of the stage of their development?
Okay, thank you for that question that encompasses a lot of issues. I'd like to say that first, the presentation from the different panelists is very on point about the challenges from the fintech side as well as from the regulator side. I believe that fintech, like any other corporate for that matter, should have corporate governance. But I think even more so for fintech, because they deal with other people's money. So it's a matter of consumer protection. They are key for financial inclusion. They are key for economic growth, especially in the most remote areas. So stakeholder materiality is stronger. And as such, trust, consumer protection are key elements to make the fintech ecosystem or sector profitable and growing. Why? Because if they have the right framework in terms of corporate governance, the right infrastructure, the right paradigm, then they can scale sustainably, safely, and fast, while at the same time building the right habits from the beginning. So many times have we heard about startups, tech company, or others that are reach scalability and then are rift with issues, or have to shut down, or have a reputational scandal because they didn't think of the base of governance. So creating a governance culture from the start can help avoid this pitfall. Now, should these governance principles applicable to all fintech, regardless of the stage of development? My answer would be yes and no. Let me clarify. I think yes on the fact that there should be the culture of governance and the foundational principle should be in place, putting a line of defense, creating a risk and other framework, having a processes control structure, and obviously following whatever local regulation and international, because we don't live in isolation. You can have a central bank regulation, but a central bank also, or as a fintech, you work with other countries. You transfer money in sometimes a different currency that require you to report to international regulation on anti-money laundering, financing of terrorism, and others. So kind of all that has to be taken into account. But I would say in terms of governance, as a startup or a younger company, you don't have the same heaviness that you will have of a corporate board, and I say corporate board, not advisory board, that you will have board pack committees that you can have in a bank or non-banking financial institution that is way bigger. I think startups don't have to build a 8-page board pack or have board subcommittee, but they should have a minimum kind of, and then thinking about this principle that I mentioned earlier in terms of corporate governance culture, charters, understanding the clear role and responsibility of the various line of defense, as well as putting the right process and control in place, create a machine that works robustly and will allow the startup to scale up resiliently and when everything happens in terms of implementation. So best practice and substance should stay there, while all the rest should go slowly as long as the company is scaling up.
Thank you, Isabel. I cannot agree more with you. I mean, I think the key message from you is a culture of corporate governance, which is reflective of your size, what you do, and how you do it, how you relate, to the ecosystem, how you operate internally, and how you relate to the ecosystem. Thank you. That is really well put. Corporate governance at the scale as operations of the fintech scale over time. Mazio, let me come to you. I mean, given what Ghana fintech payments, Ghana Fintech and Payments Association is doing, what are the specific contributions, that your association is making towards shaping fintech governance in Ghana?
So I think I'll answer that in 4 main points, where the association is supporting the ecosystem in 1, policy advocacy, capacity building, information sharing, and in standard setting. So at the beginning of this year, we supported the central bank in our constitution, in drafting a constitution for the Fintech Association, and also in creating a code of conduct for the fintechs across the ecosystem. So we've also been heavily collaborating with the Fintech office at the Bank of Ghana towards the Bank of Ghana sandbox and access to fintechs and blockchain solutions also specifically into the sandbox. We are yet to have direct policy around blockchain and cryptocurrency, and this is one of the ways in which we are encouraging the central bank to test these solutions within their sandbox system, make sure that they meet the requirements, and then be able to create the right regulation that encourages the innovation while protecting the ecosystem. And in terms of capacity building, we also actually work very heavily with the Bank of Ghana, especially with the Fintech office, to organize regular trainings for the members. So the Bank of Ghana released a report in around April, where they said that a lot of the fintechs that were applying for licenses had distinct problems with corporate governance. And they cited an example where they didn't have a board. So based off of this, we've been working with them, getting representatives and trainers from the bank to train our members, fintech companies and payment system solutions on fintech governance and how they can get on board and have structures in place, and also connecting them with the resources. So you have companies that are also signing up to join the association that are cybersecurity experts, ISO experts, for AML and CFT and so many others. So we are essentially creating this system which leads into information sharing amongst the members, right? So you have cybersecurity professionals talking to newbie fintech startups on how to build with security consciousness from the beginning. And we're allowing this collaborative environment. The next is standard setting. So at the beginning of the year also, we had the Ghana Fintech Awards, and we had the Bank of Ghana head of the Fintech office in representation to officially stamp on the association and acknowledge the association's contribution to the ecosystem and the fact that we're working together. This has lent a lot of credibility to the association, and has brought a lot more fintechs on board. And what this is doing is that we are also having the constitution and the code of conduct that is applicable across these. And what we are looking at essentially is being able to craft policies, regulation that supports the central bank, and also relate policies and regulations from the central bank to the fintechs in a way that is easily understandable by them and allows them to collaborate together so that we can create a very innovative but regulated system.
Thank you, Maiza. I want to move on to you, Mustafa. Let's take this a step deeper in terms of unraveling, the laws and regulations in Mauritania. Speaking specifically on your presentation, the new legal framework that came into existence in Mauritania, is it a framework of new laws and regulations? And does those regulations, do they cover all fintechs regardless of the type of fintech? For instance, you have fintechs in digital payments, in e-money, mobile money, digital lending. Is the new set of regulations in Mauritania, is it going across all fintech categories, all types of fintech operations?
Voilà, donc merci. Donc toutes les catégories sont touchées par la loi et sont traitées par la loi. Donc les principales catégories qui existent sont les établissements de paiement, donc qui font du cash-in, du cash-out, qui permettent le paiement de factures, les transferts, et les établissements de monnaie électronique qui font tout ce qui est émission, distribution de monnaie électronique et services de paiement également. On a d'autres catégories, mais qui n'ont pas encore été détaillées dans des textes d'application parce que la loi, elle est plus générale. Donc, les autres catégories concernent plus les agrégateurs de comptes, comme on voit dans certains pays, une nouvelle fintech qui est là et qui regroupe tous les comptes de paiement ou comptes mobiles que les clients, ils ont. Et avec cette plateforme-là ou cette application, ils peuvent avoir accès à tous ces comptes. Donc, cette catégorie-là, elle est prévue par la loi, mais n'a pas encore été détaillée. Donc, en ce qui concerne les opérations, paiement numérique et autres, tout est couvert. Par contre, on a vu que euh, c'est difficile parfois de pouvoir atteindre le niveau d'inclusion financière que l'on veut en restant sur ces services classiques-là. Donc, le prêt numérique est quelque chose qui permet de développer encore beaucoup plus l'inclusion financière. C'est pourquoi nous réfléchissons en ce sens. Donc, c'est des choses que la direction qui s'occupe de l'inclusion financière et de la stratégie met sur la table et a envie qu'on aille beaucoup plus en profondeur sur ces aspects-là. Et nous réfléchissons même à la mise en place d'une loi spécifique pour les fintechs, pour les permettre de lever les fonds, parce que ça n'existe pas. Bien vrai que nous savons que quand ces entreprises-là commencent, c'est plus la connaissance qui est là, mais les moyens n'y sont pas. Mais la Banque centrale doit aussi pouvoir faire un savant dosage entre la protection des dépôts, la clientèle, et le développement et l'émergence de ces fintechs-là. Merci.
Thank you, Mustafa. I mean, that was a good one. It's a delicate balance for policymakers, for regulators always. How do you want to nurture an environment of innovation, but at the same time, that is the responsibility you have as a regulator to protect the system, to safeguard the system, against obvious risk. So generally, your message is that in Mauritania, the new legislations have wider remits. They cover most operations. When recent times you've discovered that there are specific fintech verticals that are not covered, and effort is being made to, legislate to cover those ones, which is really an eye-opener for other jurisdictions that are on the call. Let's take a moment to respond to the questions before we go to the Q&A coming from the audience, before we go to the next set of questions. Question number one here says, let me see. It says, this can go to all of you, panelists, feel free to respond. How can we enhance corporate governance in cross-border payments? In cross-border payments. Payment that transcends, you're in Nigeria here, you want to pay somebody in Nairobi, somebody in South Africa, somebody in Mauritania. What governance considerations will normally be helpful?
So I can start and anybody can add to that. So essentially, there are already a lot of initiatives that are championing cross-border transactions. But it has to be noted that, like I said, we have different regulatory environments, economic systems, and the way forward essentially is to harmonize all these regulations across board. And I believe that we're taking firm strides towards that as a continent. You have AFTA, you have PAPS, you have WEMU, and these are all initiatives that further the cross-border transactions ecosystem. But I believe that what we need to do essentially is harmonize some of these regulations. And as fintechs, you need to also do your research and understand that these are the fragmented ecosystems that I'm dealing with. And how do I facilitate these transactions? Either through partnerships or networking with the relevant stakeholders across board. You would realize that you would need licensing, you would need different corporate structures, you would need talent in all these locations. And these are all things that have to be factored before you start scaling or as you think of your cross-border payment solution. Awesome.
Thank you, Mazio. So, I mean, essentially we are saying, do your homework foremost as a fintech, as a firm that is in the space, ensure the minimum corporate governance standards, are in operation. For instance, you want to ensure there's a clear separation between the board and management. There are issues of, there are systems in place for internal control. There are risk management and compliance in place, so that when you start doing your transactions, even locally, people know that this is an entity that operates, with minimum standards. So let alone when you start going across borders. So what we are saying is that corporate governance are important not only for domestic or local operations, but also for cross-border payments, cross-border transactions. Because if you don't exhibit minimum standards in the way you operate, you fail to exhibit the sort of credibility, that you deserve in the market, both locally and internationally. We want to scale further, going to the next set of questions. Now to you, Isabel. You are a board member. Can you just elaborate, what do you see as best practices, when it comes to effective corporate governance for the fintech ecosystem?
Ooh, that's a vast question, and I think it depends a bit on as we mentioned earlier, on the stage where the fintech are. But I think one of the if we have to encompass all the fintech, what I see in terms of best practices is our fintech that are very aware of their stakeholders and their materiality. So they know that they have to compose with the regulator, with the consumer, with the investors, and they really understand how all that fits together and find a way to build a framework that works. And also they take the substance that I mentioned before, the culture and the substance, and make it their own. They go for lean and digital, they follow the right governance framework, but they don't necessarily follow the heaviness that will have a bank board and governance. They have a board, maybe, but it will be an advisory board. They don't have the same power. That will be a mix of advisor and counsel. They might have, for example, a board pack, but the board pack will be minimal. It won't be an 80-page board pack for a bank, but the board pack will be just kind of the minimum to encourage more exchange, verbal exchange. What we see very often is that I think in terms of agenda and timing is very well managed. And when they create an agenda sheet for the board meeting, for example, they make sure that the agenda sheet is also the voting sheet, so you don't have hundreds of documents to move around. But just kind of, I think, in summary, it's kind of awareness and really taking the substance and adapt the substance to the environment in which they're working. Hello, I don't know if you still hear me.
Non, pas vraiment.
No? So nobody, do you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So should I repeat the answer or? Hello?
Patrick?
Sorry, I was on mute. Apologies, I was on mute. Thanks, Isabel. I was just referring to Mustafa, taking the discussions further. Mustafa, we want to deep dive further into the Mauritanian ecosystem. What is your observation? Are all fintechs with the same internal governance structures and system? If no, what are some of the main features that stand out when it comes to internal governance of fintech operations in Mauritania?
Donc, comme je l'ai présenté tantôt, ce qui ressort, c'est un conseil d'administration, 2 directeurs généraux. Ce qui est différent des banques, parce que les banques ont en général plusieurs comités qui sont obligatoires, donc qui émanent du conseil d'administration. On a un comité permanent d'audit interne qui n'est pas demandé au fintech. On n'a pas de comité de crédit, on n'a pas de comité de risque. Vous voyez? Donc, c'est plusieurs façons d'alléger la structure de gouvernance des fintechs. Mais cela n'empêche pas, comme je l'avais tantôt expliqué, que les 3 lignes de défense soient respectées. C'est-à-dire que l'agent, il traite avec le client, fasse d'abord un premier niveau de contrôle. Ensuite, le responsable de contrôle permanent de second niveau, c'est-à-dire le compliance officer, fasse également son travail et regarde est-ce que les opérations sont conformes à la réglementation sur le blanchiment d'argent, les seuils de transactions et autres. Et le responsable d'audit, si la fintech, bien sûr, elle est grande, elle fait son 3e contrôle, c'est-à-dire l'audit qui est périodique. Cependant, les 2 niveaux que j'ai expliqués précédemment peuvent être faits par une seule personne. Et il y a aussi l'obligation de séparer les opérationnels de ceux qui font le contrôle. Ceux qui font le contrôle, le responsable du contrôle permanent de second niveau ne peut pas initier d'opération. Donc, il ne peut que contrôler et rapporter directement au directeur général quand il y a des anomalies. Donc, sinon, c'est typiquement les mêmes structures de base qui sont là en termes de gouvernance des fintechs. Voilà, merci.
Thank you, Mustafa. Let me go back to the questions that are coming in from the participants. Try to read as much as I could. Christoph Sommer says, I have rather a comment than a question concerning the first presentation by Maizo. You nicely outlined the regulatory challenges to get the balance right between allowing innovation and competition while maintaining stability and integrity of the financial sector. This aligns very well with the policy brief that my research institution, think tank, German Institute of Development and Sustainability has recently published on addressing the challenges of digital lending for credit markets and the financial systems. Hence, I want to share this policy brief since it might be of interest. So please, participants, there is a link to that paper. Basically, it's reinforcing the fact that as regulators or policymakers, you need to maintain a fine balance in between supporting what's the innovation in the ecosystem at the same time protecting ensuring financial stability of the system. Kemira says, what are the major challenges experienced from a consumer perspective? Is the digital divide, literacy, fraud, access, affordability impediment to roll out of fintech? It's not so clear, but basically it's trying to say here what some of the major challenges experienced from a consumer perspective is digital divide, illiteracy, fraud. Okay, so essentially we're saying some of the risks that the consumers face ranges from digital divide, digital illiteracy, fraud, access, affordability impediment. So what are the solutions? Basically, the risks that are inherent in the financial system, they were there actually, they've been further emboldened by the prevalence of financial technology. So risk like fraud, digital illiteracy. Isabel, how do you see what sort of way fintechs or regulators can respond to, the risk associated with financial services in general, risk like fraud, risk like, digital illiteracy, what do you see can be done from your experience?
I think that what can be done, and it's as true for bank or for a non-banking financial institution or fintech, on the digital divide, it's kind of more like an infrastructure issue. So making sure that there is the right internet telecom infrastructure to be able to create all these digital solutions. Illiteracy is usually a matter of yes, education on others, but I think what fintech has been very good at doing is kind of finding a way to reach everybody as much as possible, irrespective of the level of literacy, making it simple for everybody to be able to use this payment system. Fraud is a main issue, because I think in terms of managing operational risk for any fintech or even any organization, operational risk is really, really important. I think for payment system, even more so. So there should be a lot of work done at the organizational level to make sure that there are control and processing in place, limitation settings, the principle of a double pair of eyes. And I think also that's where the fact that fintech association kind of work together to mention, to create a code of conduct, to share best practice, to build capacity internally. And I think also that's where the regulator has a role to play, to saying, don't worry, we are looking into it. We put a system in place, we put a government in place, and your money is safe. Because at the end of the day, as I mentioned earlier, it's fundamentally a matter of trust. Do you keep your money in your bag or under your bed, or do you put it in your phone or at the bank?
Yeah.
It's a matter of trust. So we have to make sure that all these major challenges are kind of all linked to the trunk tree that is trust, and everything has to be put in place to make sure that the governance is there to reassure the end consumer.
Yeah, thank you so much, Isabel. I think it also speaks to what Mustafa said, the 3 lines of defense, ensuring there is adequate operational risk management, to data issues about fraud, cyber crimes, etc. Another set of questions here says, it will be great to engage with Fintech network on startup governance that relates to consumers and capital providers and the overall partnership ecosystem. Partnership at early stages can be difficult if startup is not well governed, yet may be crucial for traction. Yeah, I cannot agree more with this comment. Partnership is key, even if you are a startup. Minimum, partner with somebody who has been in the field or who has similar ideas. You want to partner with someone or an entity that has some experience, that thinks whose their plans and strategies aligns with you. It could be a brother, it could be a friend, it could be somebody, another entity. Yes, we know it's challenging for startups. We've seen it in most jurisdictions where African Fintech Network, we have presence to country associations. We know often startups find it difficult to get partners to work with. So that is why we encourage startups, be part of the Fintech associations of your country. When you're part of the Fintech association of your country, it becomes easier for you to start knowing who is doing what. So you know exactly how to relate, how to sort of build that rapport, and over time build the partnership that is required. Partnership is always mutually reinforcing. Parties in any partnership benefit from it. So yes, so that was the comment in the right place. And another question here or comment says, does Fintech Network have advice on startup governance vis-a-vis investors and potential partners? Yes, for us at the African Fintech Network, we have a guide we often give to startups, we often give to associations, how to help you structure, how to help you put necessary governance mechanisms in place so that to ensure at the outset you are largely assured of survival. Not that you face challenges, because most startups do. It's inevitable that you will face some challenges, be it funding, be it management challenges, be it challenges in the market. But we have a guide that we do share with associations to help them structure operations. Another question here says, what do we need to do across the continent to incentivize specifically fintech trade finance activities across the continent and specific markets? So how do we incentivize fintech? I want to speak to you. I want you to come here, Mazio. What are the sort of incentives, either at the association level or at the level of regulators of government? What do you see as an association, as an incentives, to encourage, especially startups in the fintech ecosystem?
So incentives to encourage fintechs to grow, or incentives to encourage fintechs towards better governance and risk management? I want to be slightly clear.
Yeah, both. Whatever form of incentives, yeah.
Okay, so actually what I would like to touch on here is that the great things that can contribute to better governance and risk management for fintechs, and it's a great incentives also, is partnering with some of the incumbent financial institutions that are in the ecosystem. Sometimes as young fintechs, instead of going towards partnerships with the financial institutions, we see them as competitors. But I make the case for collaboration in that this can contribute really towards better governance and risk management, because you get access to expertise and resources that you would not usually have. Incumbent financial institutions have extensive experience in governance and risk management. And by collaborating with these institutions, fintechs can tap into their expertise and resources. You have banks and insurance companies that have often well-established risk management teams, legal departments, and compliance officers. By collaborating with them to integrate with their systems, you gain access to some of these frameworks and can incorporate them. You also gain regulatory knowledge. Now, they have also been very well versed in navigating these complex regulatory landscapes. And partnering with some of these incumbent financial institutions also lends market credibility to you as a fintech. You get to leverage on the partnerships of the already established financial institution, and this boosts your credibility and sends a signal to customers, investors, and regulators that you take your governance and risk management seriously. Now, it also opens access to capital, right? Because collaboration can open doors to funding opportunities where the financial institutions themselves may invest in or provide working capital to fintech firms. Now, this injection of capital can enable fintechs to strengthen their governance and risk mitigation practices, right, including hiring qualified personnel and implementing some of these advanced risk assessment tools. Now, complementary services. You have fintechs and incumbent financial institutions often offering complementary services. So the fintech can offer the software to make the solution faster, partnering with this financial institution. So you see that there are complementary benefits and synergies with working together. I believe that it's a win-win strategy, which should also incentivize fintechs to collaborate, because apart from this association also, you have market expansion with partnering with a bank that has maybe offices in 53 African countries, and leveraging on that to then do your cross-border solution instead of trying to build the network in each of these countries yourself. So I'm going to really round up and conclude in saying that I believe that these are incentives that sometimes we lose sight of, and it's a win-win strategy that this collaboration works. It not only strengthens governance and risk management for fintechs, but also enhances the overall stability and resilience of the financial ecosystem. Through shared experiences, resources, and a commitment to a responsible and best practices, these partnerships can contribute to a more secure and well-governed fintech landscape.
Thank you, Mazio. Thank you. We have a set of questions from the audience. Let's, okay, I'll just take one more and then we come to the panel questions. Here says, can fintech and digital identification approaches improve transparency and reduce financial integrity risk? However, money laundering and financing of terrorism threats may increase when technology enables anonymity and instant global reach. Mustafa, I want you to share your experience from the Mauritania environment. You know, the comment here is that, you know, money laundering and financing of terrorism, those sort of threats could potentially increase because of technology. And it's factual because things are done on the click of a button. So whilst there is speed, you know, in processing transactions, whilst there is agility in processing transactions, we are seeing the use of technology will also breed issues about money laundering and financing of terrorism. Is that what you see in the Mauritania ecosystem as a regulator?
Déjà, en termes d'identification, la plupart des fintechs, elles travaillent avec l'agence de recensement, c'est-à-dire que la fintech a accès aux bases de données. Parce qu'en Mauritanie, on a pu quand même avoir une identification biométrique de toute la population. Donc, tout le monde est recensé. Et maintenant, dès que vous entrez votre NNI, votre numéro d'identification unique, automatiquement, on a accès à votre base de données et la puce aussi permet et identifié. Les puces de téléphone sont également identifiées. Donc, la personne, elle est connue à la base. Et compte tenu des niveaux de compte qu'on a, on a 3 niveaux de compte. Donc, chaque niveau de compte a des montants bien précis et des plafonds qu'elle ne peut dépasser dans la journée. Donc, ces méthodes-là permettent de réduire les transactions élevées. Et le responsable, le compliance officer, a également une obligation de déclaration des transactions qu'il juge suspectes. Non seulement il les arrête, mais il peut requérir les justificatifs nécessaires lorsque ces transactions-là, il estime qu'elles ne sont pas conformes à la réglementation, et elle peut les déclarer à l'UMEF. L'UMEF, c'est une unité qui est là, qui travaille sur tout ce qui concerne le blanchiment d'argent et a également une mission transversale. Donc, elle peut aller au niveau de l'institution financière et même toucher la personne qui a initié la transaction. Donc, voilà un peu ce qui est fait en matière de blanchiment d'argent. Donc, la limitation des seuils, le responsable qui est le correspondant de l'UMF, qui a une fiche qu'elle renseigne, et cette fiche, elle est confidentielle, qu'elle transmet, donc en cas de soupçon de l'opération. Donc, voilà.
Thank you so much, Mustafa. We want to go to the last set of questions for panelists as we wrap up slowly. I'm looking at the clock here. Let me start with you, Isabel. You are playing a prominent role in the board. If you ask, what are some of the top must-dos? These are the must-dos to build a sustainable fintech ecosystem in Africa. These are the must-dos. What would be the top ones?
Ooh, the must-dos. I think if you look at the ecosystem, we see regulations start being put for startups, but they're still very loose in some of the countries. And what we see, maybe rightly or wrongly, because I think the regulator see really fintech as a tool of financial inclusion, economic growth. But what we see is that when the regulator introduces some regulation, usually, they do it without really discussing it thoroughly with the fintech association or with the ecosystem. And so we end up having, when we talk to heroes on the ground, they say that this regulation are usually not effective or conducive to boost the sector. So I think one of the must do to build a strong ecosystem is really, as was mentioned before, that not working on isolation. So all the stakeholders should be working together. So I totally understand that the regulator need to, well, regulate, but a balance has to be found between innovation and regulation, as I said before. So making sure that everybody talks, the banks, the fintech, the regulator, the consumer, that everybody talk and find a way to set up a legislation that are in line with local and international regulation, but at the same time do not stifle innovation, because at the end of the day, that's what's the most important. I think as a continent, we've been very advanced in leapfrogging a lot in fintech, and that should continue in a way, but we have to make sure that whatever we build is the most consensual and inclusive. So yes, I would say my must do, or if you're a runner or a sport person, more than I do, I think it's crucial to build muscle, but it's also equally important to stretch, to run faster and safer. So it's really a matter of resilience and robustness. These two core blocks should be there to build a sustainable fintech ecosystem. So on one side, it's evident that fintech needs framework, process control, relevant guideline, regulation. In other words, fortify the robustness, and that will only happen through governance. But simultaneously, they need to build these resilience, be flexible, better to adapt to a changing world, to the speed of technology, to the specificity of the country or the region, and that require innovative governments and regulatory requirements. So everything has to work hand in hand to increase the resilience and robustness. So kind of, if I had to say, to build a sustainable ecosystem working together, I think this webinar is a great first step for where regulator, fintech, African association, and governance body meet and discuss. I think it would have to be pushed further on this robustness and resilience. Building you mentioned earlier, Patrick, that you created something that I think it's amazing, and I would like to receive a copy of it. It's kind of this regulatory framework base for fintech. I think these kind of framework should be spread all over for fintech to kind of build this culture and the base. It should be shared as much as possible, and then from there, using regulatory sandbox to kind of test how it grows at different stage, and make sure that it could be kind of a great pilot to see how it could work that way in executing on this collaboration, and then extending that as visually as possible. So to summarize, robustness, resilience, working together with all the stakeholders to build this regulatory framework template, and collaborating, building the ecosystem.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I would say collaborative approach to regulation, and fintech ensuring that it's an effective governance system that builds resilience and agility. And you mentioned the issue of course, the pronounced use of regulatory sandboxes and innovation offices. Let me go to you, Maizo. As we wrap up, from the Ghana experience, what are some of the major regulatory developments over the last few years in support of the ecosystems? Are these developments, have they been adequate? Have they been adequate as far as the Fintechs or the Fintech associations concerned? Have they been adequate in responding to the Fintech ecosystem in Ghana?
Thank you very much for that question, and I hope you can hear me better. So I believe that the central bank has actually done very well in creating a very good ecosystem for fintech to flourish. Of course, there is a long way forward to go, and there's more improvements to be made, but you can tell that the regulator is interested in supporting innovation. Now, starting with the Payment Systems Services Act, where it establishes a framework, and generally, fintechs have welcomed this act because it has brought more clarity and legitimacy to the payment sector and provided clear guidelines on licensing, operational requirements, and dispute resolution mechanisms, which have enhanced the overall regulatory environment. There's also been the Ghana Interbank Payment Settlements Systems, GIPS. Now, I really want to mention this because GIPS has introduced several innovative payment systems, including the Ghana Automated Clearing House and the Mobile Money Interoperability Platform. Now, these initiatives aim to enhance interoperability and facilitate digital financial transactions. Now, fintech companies benefit from GIPS infrastructure to build the payment systems and offer seamless solutions due to the interoperability for mobile money services. For example, it's boosted financial inclusion and increased the reach of fintech products because they can send money interoperably very easily. And fintechs can build on this platform that has been set up by the central bank, right? So we also have the sandbox, right? The sandbox regulations and then the sandbox system have been launched, and you've had several fintechs.
Are you there, Maizo? Maizo, are you there?
Fintechs that are not currently regulated, fintechs, into provide regulation around that. Cybersecurity and consumer, and also that protect the financial system and data from cyber threats. And I think, sorry?
No, you were breaking, but go ahead. You were breaking.
Hello?
You were breaking, but go ahead. Yes, I'm getting you. We're getting you now.
How long should I continue or?
Yeah, if you can wrap up that question so we can proceed. We have barely 10 minutes ago.
Okay, so essentially, in summary, the regulatory developments in Ghana have generally been well received by the fintech community. While there are always challenges and areas for improvement, the regulatory framework has provided clarity and encouraged innovation and created an environment where fintechs can thrive. Now, the ongoing collaboration between regulators and fintech firms reflects the commitment to ensuring that regulations continue to evolve in tandem with technological advancements in the sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Maizo. As we wrap up, Mustafa, I would like you to speak to the issue of compliance. You know, I've been in the financial sector personally for over 25 years, formerly as a banker, then, went to the central bank, then at the Ministry of Finance. One thing that we see is that most financial institutions, they prefer to pay fines rather than comply. And with the new laws in Mauritania, what's the rate of compliance?
C'est vrai que la conformité est quelque chose de très lourd pour les banques, surtout, ou les fintechs, autant pour moi, surtout lorsqu'elles gagnent beaucoup d'argent. Elles ont, en général, lorsque la Banque centrale ne supervise pas ou ne sanctionne pas, elles ne sont pas, elles ne sont pas en conformité, elles ne respectent pas, parfois, hein, la réglementation. Mais c'est très important, en fait, de sanctionner parce que les sanctions permettent aux établissements qui sont les fintechs et même les banques ou toute institution financière de façon générale de respecter la réglementation, de venir à la réglementation. D'où même sur la réflexion de est-ce qu'il faut publier les sanctions? Parce que certains, effectivement, comme vous l'avez souligné, préfèrent ne pas payer, préfèrent payer, autant pour moi, préfèrent payer que de, que de respecter tout ce qui est loi et réglementation. Alors que lorsque les sanctions sont publiées, elles ont plus une réputation qui risque d'être ternie et donc, cela, ça peut être un contrepoids pour que ces acteurs-là, les fintechs en l'occurrence ici, et donc respectent plus la réglementation. C'est un peu ça. Mais c'est très difficile de voir une fintech ou quelque institution financière que ce soit conforme, soit compliance à 100%. C'est là où maintenant la Banque centrale intervient. Donc les sanctions ne sont pas en général la première étape. Donc il faut, après une inspection ou qu'on a constaté des anomalies sur un contrôle sur pièce, faire des contrats programmes et donner des délais pour que l'institution ou la fintech respecte euh, les manquements relevés par la Banque centrale sur une période de temps. Donc, au fur et à mesure, on envoie des lettres ou on envoie des missions qui vont vérifier. Si maintenant le contrat vient à épuisement, le contrat programme qui a pour objet de dire à l'institution financière et de le matérialiser, de dire à l'institution financière, vous devez respecter, par exemple, la fonction de séparation de celui qui initie les opérations et celle qui doit contrôler et que l'institution financière, à un certain moment, ne respecte pas, là, la Banque centrale peut dire, effectivement, on va sanctionner pécuniairement. Et les sanctions pécuniaires sont une première phase. Quand on constate que les sanctions pécuniaires ne marchent pas, on peut venir et faire des sanctions administratives. Ça veut dire tout simplement changer le directeur général parce que peut-être que ça peut être lui le problème ou toucher les membres du conseil d'administration et les sensibiliser par rapport aux manquements qu'il y a. Parce que il faut aussi savoir que la plupart des problèmes, les manquements qui existent, c'est le manque de conformité et en l'occurrence en matière de gouvernance qui conduit aux problèmes de faillite. Donc, quand on n'a pas un dispositif de gouvernance qui est bon, quand la fintech n'est pas bien gérée au départ, lorsque c'est pas strict, lorsque des procédures ne sont pas respectées, lorsque des opérations sont faites n'importe comment, lorsque les fonds sont collectés et utilisés euh, comme le veut le directeur général et non en conformité à la réglementation, c'est ce qui conduit à amener des problèmes de liquidité. Et donc, les problèmes de liquidité en général ne sont qu'un début. Après, ça devient des problèmes de solvabilité. Donc, la fintech n'arrive plus à se développer, elle n'a plus de fonds, elle n'est plus crédible. Donc, comme pour revenir et pour, un peu à ce que vous avez dit, plusieurs préfèrent payer des amendes, mais publier les sanctions est quelque chose qui est assez dissuasif
Thank you.
et, et rendre les sanctions beaucoup plus dures. Merci.
Thank you, Mustafa. As we wrap up, we have, a couple of minutes to go. I want to give each of the panelists 1 minute to wrap up. And Mustafa, I will start up with you. As a way of wrap up, in your presentation, you showed evidence of good work that is being done in the Mauritanian financial system when it comes to consumer complaints management or consumer protection. What would be your takeaway message or final word when it comes to consumer protection or consumer complaint management in 1 minute?
Voilà, donc effectivement, parce que la cible de tous ces fintechs, de toutes ces fintechs-là, c'est les consommateurs. Donc c'est eux qui sont à la base de tout ce travail qui est fait par la Banque centrale et les législateurs. Et comme on dit, le client, il est roi. Il ne faut pas lâcher le client aux mains de ces fintechs-là, tout simplement. Donc, c'est pourquoi, comme je l'ai détaillé dans mon slide tantôt, il est important que ces consommateurs puissent vouloir fermer leur compte s'ils le veulent et quand ils le veulent. Ils doivent avoir accès à un certain nombre de services gratuits. Ils doivent pouvoir aussi avoir accès à tout moment à leur compte. Donc, il est important de pouvoir s'inspirer, je pense, des bonnes pratiques en matière de protection des consommateurs et que les clients puissent ne pas se plaindre ou lorsqu'ils se plaignent au niveau de l'institution financière, la Banque centrale prend le relais et regarde ce qui va ou qui ne va pas et puisse faire le travail qui imparti, que l'institution doit lui-même faire, c'est-à-dire indemniser le consommateur. Si maintenant, il voit que le consommateur n'a pas raison, parce qu'il peut y arriver des situations où le consommateur n'a pas raison, là, dire au consommateur, effectivement, voilà, nous, notre solution. Et le consommateur, lui, peut se rabattre à un autre niveau, au niveau de la justice, et là, ça sort hors de contrôle. Donc, de façon générale, il est important de mettre l'accent sur la protection des consommateurs, des services financiers, pour développer l'inclusion financière et la confiance dans le système. Voilà. Merci.
Thank you, Mustafa. Isabel, as a final parting word in 1 minute, governance and regulations. I mean, we've discussed extensively as being major challenge when it comes to development of the ecosystem. What would be your final parting words, both for fintechs, for investors, and for policymakers?
Oh, in terms of regulation, I would say, please, regulator, adjust your regulation. We understand the constraint, but adjust your relation to the reality of the ecosystem that you have. You have startups of 3 people, you have startups of 500 people, 10,000. So it has to be adjusted. The idea is not to stifle innovation. As a board member, our role is to ensure governance. So it's a mix of governance and performance, making sure that we are conform to all the regulation and policies in place, and also working on performance. And in able to find this balance, we need the help of the regulator to ensure that this balance is possible. So it's all linked together, and we have all to work together to make sure that we can have something stable, but at the same time continue building a striving fintech ecosystem.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Isabel. Mazio, 1 more minute for you. You are a member of the Ghana Fintech and Payments Association. What would you say are your parting words when it comes to the role of fintech associations in promoting governance of fintechs?
So I believe that the role of the Fintech Association in promoting fintech governance is essentially supporting fintechs with the resources that they lack, providing them with the capacity building, providing them with the lobbying services that allows them to communicate their needs to the regulator, and also a bridge between them and incumbent financial solutions to support their growth. And that is the role of the association. And as many fintechs should join associations to be able to lend us a more credible voice and allow us to put their needs forward.
Thank you, Maizo. I think what is apparent from this 90 minutes of discussion is the fact that we can go almost endlessly in discussing issues about governance, issues about regulations, because these are fundamental, or they are critical issues when it comes to supporting the development of the fintech ecosystem in Africa. Internal governance of the fintech themselves, the way they are structured, the way they are run, the way they operate, issues about internal controls, risk management, compliance, the 3 lines of defense, board role, management role, engagement with the stakeholders, engagement with policy, the responsiveness of policy to innovation, as Isabella is saying, proportionality, as Mustafa said as well. The regulators must collaborate, must involve the ecosystem when they bring regulations, when they enact regulations, when they conceive regulations. So the conversation is an ongoing conversation. And this webinar is meant to kickstart this conversation. Hopefully, this webinar will have a follow-up webinar in the next couple of weeks, which will be announced, because we want to deep further, look at other jurisdictions. So they've looked at Ghana, we've looked at Mauritania, for instance, as case study. We want to look at other jurisdictions, see what is happening in terms of fintech governance and regulations, and eventually, hopefully, together with Making Finance Work for Africa and AfricaNenda and us, African Fintech Network, we will come with a position, a communique to stakeholders in the African ecosystem. Stakeholders like governments, regulators, central banks, for instance, the fintechs themselves, to say, in order to support the development of the ecosystem when it comes to governance and regulations, these are the must-dos. So with that, I would like to thank my panelists, Mazio, I would like to thank you, Mustafa, I would like to thank you, Isabel, the organizers, and you participants who have stayed on. I know we have not exhausted all of your questions. As I said, I'll be a part 2 of this webinar. We'll respond to the questions and hopefully bring other panelists or some of these panelists again to engage into deeper discussions. At this point, I would like to draw the curtains down. So say thank you very much. Stay tuned. Thank you for Making Finance Work for Africa. Thank you, AfricaNenda, and of course, my own employers, the African Fintech Network. It's been a great webinar. I hope we'll be able to share some perspective as to how we can support the ecosystem when it comes to governance and when it comes to regulations. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.
Thank you for having us.
Merci, thank you. Au revoir.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Au revoir.
Bye.
Bye. Yeah.
Merci.